I finished watching Musafir Cafe 2 days ago. And I have to admit, I had immediate sides. There were parts where I found myself completely aligned with one character, and parts where I was almost arguing with the screen. And then I went to sleep. And the next morning, these people were still in my head. Not because I had suddenly changed my mind about what I had watched, something else had happened.
कोई थोड़ी देर के लिए, कोई जिंदगी भर के लिए।
तुम्हारे चेहरे पे ना वो वाली एनर्जी है।
लॉयर हैं आप?
जी।
ऑब्जेक्शन मिलॉर्ड।
मिलॉर्ड नहीं होता।
सस्टेन्ड। मोहब्बत का अजीब ही तरीका होता है, वो फिर से लौट आती है किसी नए रूप में, किसी नई मुस्कुराहट के साथ।
Caught myself unraveling these emotions the characters had left behind. And it's generally sort of heartwarming to see some web series to do this to all of us after such a long time. Why was I irritated with one person in one scene and feeling tenderness towards them in another? Why was I defending somebody and then 10 minutes later thinking, no, absolutely not. And that's when I realized that perhaps this is what makes this series so interesting. And not to forget the ineffable lyrics and the music that has added so much of magic to this. It gives us a very intimate little laboratory of relationships, not necessarily a model of what relationships should look like, but a place where freedom, desire, attachment, commitment, responsibility, and choice all collide. And I want to take a look at it through a slightly different lens today. So, welcome to Aligned Hearts, and we are going to explore some really interesting questions on relationship dynamics through the example of this web series, The Musafir Cafe. And not at a very shallow level, like who is right, who is wrong, who is toxic, who is the victim. I want to take a look at accountability, because eventually everything stops at you. Your choices stop at you. Your boundaries stop at you. Your life stops at you. But that doesn't mean other people's behavior does not matter. It means we have to be able to hold two truths at once. Someone can influence you, manipulate you, hurt you, confuse you, and you still have responsibility for what you choose once you recognize what is happening. And it's not as easy as it sounds. But that distinction is where I want to spend this episode, this story, briefly, to just give a recapitulation of the story for those who have watched. And those who haven't watched, you can just save this podcast and come back to it later, because I am going to discuss the details of the story. And it means that I will have to also reveal the parts that you don't want to be deprived of unless you really go through the series, go through the crests and troughs, and really see the conflict of being everyday human being, especially in today's day and life. So, as far as the story is concerned, we have Chander. Chander meets Sudha under circumstances where the ethical and moral compass of what is happening is already questionable. So, we're not going to give it a label. They share a love story. I'm deliberately leaving that sentence open, because whether what happens between them should simply be called a love story is one of the things we are going to examine. They separate. Chander and Sudha separate. Chander has a new partner, Preeti, and Preeti is giving him much of what he was looking for: commitment, partnership, a life together. Then Sudha comes back. She says she has come to see him one last time. And things unfold very differently from what that intention suggests. Now, we have this complicated triangle of people who are each carrying something unresolved. And that is where the story really begins for me. Okay, so Sudha. Let's try to start our analysis from Sudha as a character. And at this time, I have to say that there are people who are discussing already on Instagram most of the points. And I am going to take really different perspectives, the unusual ones, elaborately look at it, slice them into small pieces so that we can get to the roots which we can actually work with and which we can actually use in our everyday life. Okay, not denying the reality, not denying how the situation is at the moment, but if we are to say we are going to be in a relationship, there are certain things that we need to work with. And that's exactly the analysis is going to focus on. There will be something that you will leave this podcast episode with. Okay, coming back to Sudha. Sudha's career orientation is actually one of the things that I appreciate about her. She represents freedom, and freedom is not the problem here. Her independence is something to admire. Okay? The way she chooses to care for her mother is actually one of the more beautiful parts of her character. She takes an inherited social rule and asks, does this really need to be followed? And I like that. She doesn't automatically accept the version of the womanhood that has been handed over to her. She is playful. She's irreverent in some ways, curious, has a mind of her own. None of that needs an apology. Let's get that out of the way, okay? I'm not questioning Sudha's freedom. I am questioning what happens when the charm of that freedom begins to override another person's agency. Because you can be radically clear about yourself and still be insufficiently curious about the person you are involving yourself with. And that's where Sudha becomes fascinating. Where does the first crack happen? We see Sudha meeting men who are looking for marriage. And she treats the whole thing almost like an entertainment. It's funny. She rejects them. She ridicules the seriousness with which they approach marriage. And because we are seeing it through her eyes, we laugh with her. But I want us to pause there. There are real people on the other side of that joke. They may genuinely be looking for a wife. They may be serious about building a family. They may have entered that conversation with emotional stakes. Sudha already knows that this is not what she wants. So, the ethical question is not, should she marry them? Of course not. She has every right to reject them. The question, however, is, why does somebody else's seriousness become entertainment for her? That is the first little crack for me. Because rejection is healthy, contempt for another person's desire is something else. And this has a very real parallel in dating today. Someone knows they don't want a serious relationship, but they enjoy the attention of someone who does. They keep the person around because it's flattering, because it's fun, because the attention feels good. And then they don't want the commitment by calling that lack of commitment as something called as freedom. But freedom becomes ethically complicated when you know the other person is playing a completely different game. Chander enters, right, in the scene. Then Sudha meets Chander in this game that she was treating as an entertainment. Suddenly the woman who was so certain about her rules becomes curious. That's the word. Now actually I love this part because this is human. You can have an entirely very different philosophy about relationships until someone enters your life who disrupts it. There's nothing wrong with changing your mind. There's nothing wrong with discovering that somebody makes you feel differently. The problem begins somewhere else. It's very clear. She's very clear about what she wants. But how curious is she about what he wants? She keeps singing her own song. Great. Freedom, no marriage, no conventional life, no rules. You know, it's interspersed in the relation, in the dialogues that she has in the context. Not necessarily that, listen, this is what I want, this is what you want. Does it actually make sense for us to go along? And because she's fascinated by him, she starts assuming that her worldview is the worldview that he has to also kind of share. Okay? That's the whole conversation about. There are two people here. He has his own life, his own expectations, his own idea of partnership, his own emotional history, and I don't see enough curiosity from her about that. It's okay to have your own song. It's not okay to become so absorbed in your own song that you forget there is another person standing in the room. And especially when you realize that this person is beginning to respond to you, get more invested in you. So we will come to the point where she realizes the kind of influence she has in his life. Because Chander is clearly affected by her, we can see it. But he doesn't immediately play along with her even in the beginning. There is hesitation, there is resistance, there is calmness about it. He's trying to understand her. This is very important. Because he doesn't simply fall into her philosophy. He doesn't immediately say, fine, I don't want marriage either. There is a man being pulled into a territory that is new to him. And then Sudha notices something. She has influence over him. And this is for me the turning point. Because now she is not merely expressing herself. She is beginning to use her influence. She enters his space. She literally gate crashes into his home. She takes his life for granted in a way that is initially charming because it's very characteristic of her. Think about it. At what point did she actually check? Are you okay with me entering this much into your life? What are you looking for? What are you ready for? What do you think this is becoming? Those conversations are not happening. Instead, she keeps increasing both physical and emotional proximity. It was her initiative. She stays, she becomes part of his everyday life. She makes efforts, he responds. She creates experiences, she builds familiarity, she becomes central. And eventually, Chander is deeply emotionally invested. That is where I want to pause the romantic reading. Now, I want you to ask yourself, did he choose the entire emotional arrangement? Or did he initially choose her while she gradually constructed the relationship around him? There's a difference. Well, is this manipulation? This is where I would actually use the word carefully. Manipulation doesn't always mean evil intention. It can happen because somebody is perhaps emotionally immature, because they want something, they enjoy influence, they believe they know what is best, but it may not be the fact, because they don't want to lose access to someone. Sudha can see that Chander is falling and she continues. She doesn't step back and say, you are getting attached to me, let us stop and talk about what this means. Instead, she continues creating the conditions in which attachment deepens. And that is where I would call it emotional manipulation. Not because she hypnotizes him, not because he has no agency, but because she recognizes the effect she's having and continues to intensify it without adequately clarifying the terms. Look at him. He's not simply playing her game. He's literally being pulled into it. And that doesn't make him innocent. It makes the situation ethically more complicated, I would say. Because she has influence, he has agency, both matter, but I think that's where this whole intoxicating pair form a bond. And I want to introduce a psychological model for this, a pursuer-distancer dynamic. I'm not diagnosing fictional characters, but I'm just using this model to understand the relationship shown here. One person moves closer, the other moves away. The distance increases usually the anxiety. The anxiety creates more persuade. The persuade creates more withdrawal. And suddenly, the relationship develops its own nervous system. It becomes very intoxicating. And this is important. Intensity is not the same thing as compatibility. Sometimes, the very instability of a relationship creates its intensity. You're never settled. You never know where you stand. You keep getting little doses of connection followed by uncertainty. That can feel like extraordinary chemistry. But it can also simply be emotional activation. Sudha and Chander become almost perfectly designed to activate each other. So when emotional closeness becomes physical intimacy, okay? Now, then comes the hill walk, okay? Towards the end. Taking a walk with somebody is not a betrayal. Having coffee alone with somebody is not a betrayal. Spending time with someone of the opposite sex is not automatically emotional disloyalty. The question is, what are you creating inside that space? Because two people can sit across a coffee table for an hour and maintain a completely clear boundary. And two people can walk together for 20 minutes and create an intimacy that has no business existing anymore. And that's what I see happening here. Look at the way Sudha enters that space with Chander. The old emotional language returns, the memories, the teasing, the soft teasing, the questions, the little provocations. She's not simply walking beside him. She's reopening an emotional territory that already has history. You know how I would gauge this is imagine the presence of Preeti along his side. Do you think she would talk to him that way? She would look at him, she would give those long pauses and say, tell me now, why did you not marry Preeti? And would he actually respond that, I didn't divorce you. If you cannot have that kind of a conversation in the presence of their current partner, you have no business of having that conversation. As simple as that. Chander response, that's where I wanted to come for the accountability of Chander as well. The emotional closeness begins to organically encroach into physical intimacy. And then comes the last hug. For me, this is intimate. Not because a hug is inherently sexual, it's not. But look at the context. Look at the tenderness. Look at Chanda holding her hands, the way he holds her face. This is not simply two old friends saying goodbye. There is tenderness here that belongs to a much more intimate relationship. And if Chander is in a committed relationship with Preeti, for me, this is an absolute deal breaker because a physical gesture is revealing what has already happened emotionally. The boundary was crossed before that hug. The hug simply makes it visible now. As a contrast, I want to draw a deliberate parallel. Look at Preeti. Preeti also goes for a long walk with Rahil. And Rahil has has feelings for Preeti, let's say that. Our conclusion is not that, men and women should not walk alone together. No. Just look at this body language. She can spend time with another man. She can walk with him, have a conversation, share the same space, yet maintain a certain emotional distance. She doesn't create that private, charged space where the other person is invited to become emotionally significant. That's the distinction. The behavior itself is not the boundary. The relational meaning you create through that behavior, the permission you allow the other person to enter into your space, that is the boundary. So, as I said, walking is not the problem, coffee is not the problem, conversation is not the problem. But the question is, what kind of space are you creating between the two of you? Are you simply spending time together? Or are you creating an emotional atmosphere in which attraction can grow, old intimacy can be retrieved, and the other person begins to occupy that territory that belongs to your relationship with somebody else? That's where discernment matters. And okay, now comes another important point that stayed with me, and it was hurting my heart to even watch this. It's this marriage conversation between Sudha and Chanda. It's that scene which changes the ethical weight of everything. Chanda wants to marry Sudha. He wants a life with her. Okay, this is before this split, just before this split. He's not just having a relationship for fun. He wants a companionship, a life. The way the conversation unfolds is very uncomfortable for me. There's a gaslighting like dynamic here. I use the term carefully. I'm not diagnosing a fictional character.
चंद्र क्या कह रहे हो तुम? Yeah, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm sorry. शादी? I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. I'm sorry. सुधा, एक मिनट रुके बात तो कर लो यार मुझसे.
सबसे पहले तुमने
But psychologically, what happens resembles a familiar pattern.
ये पूछा कि मैं कैसे फील कर रही हूँ.
Very sorry, Sudha.
नहीं चंदर, सॉरी तो मुझे होना चाहिए, क्योंकि आज मैंने रियलाइज किया कि हमारे रिश्ते में तुम
Chandra's legitimate desire for commitment gets reframed.
नहीं सुधा, कोई कॉम्प्रोमाइज नहीं है. ये क्या कह रही हो?
क्या था वो चंदर? शादी हर प्रॉब्लम का
As though the desire itself is unreasonable and he's pushed towards apologizing for what?
I know that. I don't know. पता नहीं क्यों मेरे मुंह से.
For one, something that was never clearly negotiated anyway. And I want to be also more specific about why this matters. Finding someone who wants you as their wife or spouse is not something to loathe. It's not something to ridicule. It's not automatically neediness. It's not the lack of evolution. It's a value, a very desirable value for most of the people, which is also a rare quality. In today's dating culture, where people can spend months or years in ambiguity, situationships like Sudha preferred, undefined relationships, emotional arrangements that never quite become anything, someone saying, I want you as my wife can actually be one of the clearest things another human being can tell you. You can say no. You can say this is not the life I want, but you cannot make the person feel morally defective for wanting it. That's where I think something very important gets lost in the language of modern freedom. We have become very protective of the person who doesn't want commitment. We also need to protect the person who does want. Now, other problem that I have with this character of Sudha and what gets covered under the blanket of her freedom is something that should not be romanticized. It's that she is the one who is deciding his life for him.
I just want to be with you. And is that really so bad?
It looks selfless, it looks like a sacrifice, it looks like noble. But I want to ask a very difficult question here. Who gave her the authority to decide what his life needs?
नहीं, मुंबई.
क्या?
हाँ, मुंबई. देखो मैं सोच रहा हूँ 1 महीने का नोटिस पीरियड सर्व करके हम एक फ्रेश स्टार्ट कर लेंगे. कुछ दिन घर मैं संभाल लूंगा, तुम अपनी जॉब पे फोकस करना. और मुंबई है यार, आई कैन इजीली फाइंड अ न्यू जॉब.
एक सेकेंड, तुमने अपनी जॉब क्विट कर दी मेरे साथ मुंबई आने?
His life needs. Maybe Chander could have taken a job. Maybe he could have built his business elsewhere.
तुम ही तो हमेशा कहती हो कि अपने सपनों के पीछे जाना चाहिए.
हाँ चंदर, अपने सपनों के पीछे. तुम्हारा सपना मुंबई में कॉर्पोरेट जॉब करना नहीं है ना? तो तुम्हारा सपना तो पहाड़ में जाके कैफे खोलना है, नहीं?
हाँ, पर मेरा सपना तुम भी हो सुधा.
Maybe Mumbai, Pune, Goa. He didn't have to go to the hills immediately. Maybe somewhere completely different. Maybe he would have chosen her. He would have chosen the dream. Maybe he would have found a third path. Because paths evolve, change. We don't know.
मेरे साथ क्या? चंदर, हम अभी पहाड़ से वापस आए थे. कितना खुश थे तुम वहाँ. पंकज के साथ मिलके तुमने प्लान शॉर्टलिस्ट किए थे. तो ये तुम्हारा प्लान कैसे बन गया यार?
I just want to be with you. And is that really so bad?
No, because nobody knows. It was his life and he should have been allowed to find out. There's a difference between I don't want to be the reason you don't pursue your dream. And I have decided that you need to lose me in order to pursue that dream because I see that you're completely lost in me. And I know how important this dream is too. Don't decide for that other person. The second sacrificial sounding decision the other person makes is actually a form of control. Puts you in a position of deciding what is best for another adult. And sometimes sacrifice can be very genuine in love, but it's also a way of controlling the ending. Let the other person choose. And last part, which is about her cold exit. She closes the door. Chanda calls. Normal. He wants to talk. He wants to understand. She doesn't allow the conversation. This matters psychologically. Because when you suddenly remove someone from an emotionally intense relationship without allowing the relationship to be processed, you don't necessarily create closure. You can create an unfinished loop, and that's what she did. And that's unfinished loop is very powerful. That's usually the reason why people get obsessed. They replay, they imagine alternate endings, they wonder what they could have done. The person who leaves.
आज के बाद मुझे कभी फोन मत करना चंदर.
सुधा प्लीज.
और मिलने की कोशिश भी मत करना. We're bloody over, Chandar. We are over.
Can become psychologically more powerful than when they were physically present. So when Sudha returns, she's not walking into an empty emotional space. She's walking back into something unfinished. Now let's come properly to Chanda. I have sympathy for him, but I don't absolve him. He may have been influenced. He may have been manipulated. He may have been emotionally pulled in, but he's still responsible for what he does next with somebody else. And this is where his biggest weakness is not that he loves Sudha, is that he doesn't fully make a choice. He wants the emotional truth of Sudha. He wants the security of Preeti. He wants the memory. He wants the present. He wants the intensity. He wants the stability. And at some point, life asks, choose. Because sometimes being undecided is itself a decision. And an undecided person can hurt people terribly. Not because they intend to, and somewhere because of this not intending to be bad, they end up being bad. These are the two classic examples of Sudha and Chander. And that's how somehow they are like kind of a toxic pair together. They belong together. They keep everybody suspended while they figure themselves out. And that's not fair. No? Let's cut back to the hill walk again. Chander's responsibility. This is why it matters to us to analyze this part. Chander knows who this woman is to him. He knows the history. He knows what she does to him. He knows there is still something alive there. And yet he goes. And then they talk. Then they remember. They don't just have tea. They go for a walk. He could have denied. When she said, please show me around the hills, they know that she knew what she was going to ask. What she wanted was a little more privacy, was a little more time for that fondness to come back, kick back in. They both are not children. And that emotional closeness will eventually become physical at some point. So my question to the character of Chander is, what did you think was going to happen? Because sometimes we behave as though boundaries are only required after something happens. No, boundaries are often required precisely because you know what could happen. He may not have started the fire, but he keeps bringing oxygen to it. And that's where his responsibility becomes heavier. And last but not the least, Preeti, the woman who knows but keeps being reassured. As I said, internet is split over their feelings towards these characters. Some people are really praising Preeti and some people are saying, no, she's also at fault. I just want to tweak one point there. There is a difference between the character who stays despite being shown that they're not important and people who are shown they're important mostly, but not just as important. It's like not that she doesn't have any emotional closeness with Vikrant, with the character Chander. It's not that he doesn't express how important she is to him.
और खास तौर पे अपने कैफे का ओपनिंग डे तो बिल्कुल नहीं.
He does all the right things. He says all the right things.
P3 to us.
Come here.
Oh. See, this is precious. I love it.
Happy?
But she feels there is something missing. So this is very different from the lack of it and hence and still continuing to be part of it. The situation she's put into is very tricky, trust me. Because when you fall in love, you look for even the wrong reasons to stay. Now she has the right reasons to stay. If you look at his character, without knowing the character, how he was with Sudha, you wouldn't imagine he's having any emotional weightage as much as actually it's there inside him. You know, it just feels like, okay, he's had a bad past and he's a serious person. Things have made him into a man and yeah, he's moved on with life and he reassures her. And that reassurance is actually something that's very heartbreaking for me. And I think for many people to watch Preeti, to be subject through that. This is the reason I'm the most compassionate towards that character than to anybody else there. As I said, it's easy to say, why doesn't she see it? Why is she allowing this? Why doesn't she put her foot down? She's so accommodating and that's actually unfair to her. She's not being given nothing. She is being given a lot. Chander tells her what she means to him. He shows her affection, reassures her. He gives her reasons to believe that she's the woman he has chosen. So when we say everybody can see what's happening except Preeti, I don't think it means she's blind. You know, she's being given very convincing reasons to keep believing him. That changes everything. And her intuition is actually working because Preeti does have moments.
And listen, I don't want to make this uncomfortable for you.
Preet, I'm here. बोलो.
मान लो अगर कभी किसी दिन तुम्हें अचानक सुधा मिल गई तो
where she feels it. She voices her insecurity.
What? आज अचानक से ये सवाल क्यों?
कुछ टाइम से दिल में ये बात आती रहती है.
She senses that something is not completely settled. That's the part of her that knows this man is doing things right, saying things right, but he's not entirely here with me.
मैं बोल नहीं पाती. आज पता नहीं क्या हुआ. And then I was like,
No secrets between partners, right?
No secrets, ever.
And that the beautiful, painful thing is that other people can see it too. Rahil sees something, Mark sees something, audience sees it, Preeti senses it.
तो इस अनसाइंटिफिक थ्योरी के हिसाब से ना मैं ना तुम कोई भी वो नहीं है जो वो 7 साल पहले थे. So
But every time that feeling rises in her, Chanda gives her another piece of reassurance, another expression of love, another indication that she matters, another reason to trust him. So she goes back. Because what else is she supposed to do with contradictory information? Her intuition says something is happening. His words say, "You're the woman I love." And his behavior towards her says, "You matter to me." And then there is this other woman who carries a completely different emotional history with him. So that's an incredibly confusing place for a person to live. So I don't want to make Preeti into a foolish woman who simply doesn't see. I think she sees. She's been given the short end of the stick. And yeah, that is extremely hard to see. Where I would actually see she could have used her agency is she could have been more raw, more honest, more herself, when in the end he comes back to her, asks her, "How do you feel?" Instead of saying, "I'm all right," she could have said, "I don't know what this is doing to me. I'm scared of losing you. I don't feel comfortable with you spending this any time alone with her or with a woman who you have loved so deeply, which I see in you. There is part of it which is clouding you. Or I want you to have closure," but perhaps she could have expressed that rawness, I think, to make sure Chandar, if he really had to choose, it would have been the time for him to choose. And maybe he would have done things differently, made Sudha meet him in Preeti's presence. That would have been stellar, actually. Well, that last one part is important. She actually encourages Chandra to meet Sudha.
तुमने मुझे बताया क्यों नहीं कल रात?
चंदर, जाके मिल लो सुधा से. मैंने उसे रुकने को कहा था.
क्यों?
And on one level, that is generous. She's trying to be mature, trying to give him space to resolve his past. But I also think it's slightly too good girl syndrome, too composed, too reasonable, too accommodating. She's been with this man for years. She has enough agency to say, "Yes, go have that conversation, but I'm not going to pretend this doesn't scare me." Or even as simple as, "I want you to have closure, but I want to sit there with you. I trust you, but I'm afraid." That vulnerability might have made the equation much more honest. The weightage of that whole emotional story tilting towards Chander and Sudha, more chemistry, Chander and Preeti, more platonic, and all of that thing. Because technically, see, Chander and Sudha literally had few months of relationship. I think I'm being generous in saying month, more than a month. But Preeti and Chander have spent 7 years. I mean, what is the comparison? And to say something like, "I'm scared of losing you," is far healthier than performing, "I'm completely okay with whatever you need and go ahead," over accommodation. So now let's put all these characters beside each other. Okay, who's the villain? Who's the victim? But what was each person's responsibility? Sudha, when it comes to Sudha, her responsibility was to be honest about what she wanted, to understand Chandra's desires as seriously as she understood her own, to stop treating his emotional availability as something she could experiment with simply because she found him interesting, to recognize when she was influencing him, and to respect the boundary once another relationship existed. Her freedom is not the problem. Her lack of accountability for the impact of that freedom is. And when it comes to Chandra, his responsibility was to own his attraction, to protect the relationship he had chosen with Preeti, to stop maintaining two emotional realities, to understand that being manipulated doesn't make every subsequent choice innocent, no? Most importantly, also to choose. Because once you know that another person still has the emotional power over you, continuing to move closer is a choice. Preeti, her responsibility, I would say, was a bit different. She was not responsible for Sudha's return. She was not responsible for Chandra's unresolved feelings. She was not responsible for the triangle, but she was responsible for her own emotional truth, for saying what she was afraid, for naming what she needed, for refusing to quietly accept correct second position for allowing herself to be vulnerable instead of endlessly reasonable. And if she eventually discovers that the relationship cannot give her what she needs, she has that agency to walk away. Okay, what are the takeaways we're going to have from this? Freedom does not remove responsibility. You're free to choose your life, but so is the person you're involving yourself with. Give them enough truth to make their own choice. Point number 2, wanting commitment is not a weakness. Wanting marriage is not neediness. Wanting spouse is not lack of evolution. You can reject it for yourself without humiliating someone who wants it. Third, your freedom ends where another person's agency is being overridden. You don't get to choose or decide another adult's destiny because you believe you know what is best for them more than them. Talk, tell them, let them choose. Intensity is not compatibility, as the fourth point I would put it. The push and pull is intoxicating. The longing can be very enormous. Chemistry can be real. And still the relationship may not be capable of giving another person, either of the persons, peace. Point 5, emotional disloyalty often precedes physical betrayal. It can begin with the emotional territory you allow someone to occupy. The private conversations, the revived memories, secret tenderness, the charged spaces you continue to create. The hug is often not where the boundary begins. It's where the boundary becomes visible. Point number 6, don't romanticize unfinished love. Sometimes what feels like extraordinary love is intensified by the fact that it never got to become ordinary life. Unfinished does not automatically mean destined. Point number 7, sacrifice can contain control. Leaving someone because you don't want to hold them back can be beautiful. Deciding for them that they need to lose you is something else. Let people choose their own lives. Point number 8, kindness is not self-abandonment. Preeti or Preetis in everyday life don't need to become harder. She just needs to become clear, compassionate. Compassion is not the problem. Generosity is not the problem. She deserves to say, this is hurting me. I'm afraid. I need more. I don't want to be second. This is not insecurity. It's emotional honesty. Point number 9, don't make your partner live inside your indecision. In this case, Chander's feelings are complicated. That's human. But once you know your confusion is affecting another person's life, your confusion becomes your responsibility to work through. Point number 10, the person who's not choosing is also making the choice. Indecision feels neutral. It's not. Point number 11, look at the emotional meaning, not just the physical act. Walk is a walk, coffee is coffee, hug is a hug, until context, history, intention, and emotional charge give that act another meaning. Point number 12, the moral compass is for you first. Don't use it only to identify Sudha or Chander or Preeti. Ask, where do I see myself? Where do I overreach? Where do I avoid? Where do I overgive? Where do I accept breadcrumbs? Where do I manipulate without realizing it? Where do I allow somebody else's choice determine my worth? And final thought, and perhaps that is why Musafir Cafe stayed with me, because underneath Sudha, Chander and Preeti, underneath the attraction and the confusion and the choices, there's something much more contemporary happening. We have more freedom than many generations before us, and I hope we keep that freedom. But freedom asks something from us. It asks for maturity, clarity. It asks us to understand another person's heart is not an experimental playground simply because we have decided our own life should be free. So with that thought, I'm going to leave this and stay curious about your own patterns and stay honest about what your heart is asking you to see.